So we'll turn now to book 24. I'm skipping over largely book 23. Book 23 depicts not war games, funeral games that are held by Achilles with the Greek troops for the funeral of Patroclus. So this is something we see in many of the epics. We'll see it in the Aeneid as well. In book 5, I believe it is, funeral games it will be contests of strength, contests of speed, ship racing, these types of competitions, and Achilles has prizes that he announces for the winners and what have you. So this kind of really stressing the competitive spirit, let us say, of the Greeks. These always trying to, again, showing that one's identity is tied to these honors by being the best at that pursuit, let's say. So we won't go into depth in that. We'll turn to book 24, and as I said, really the climax of the epic in terms of its thematics, and that climax is really encapsulated in this scene of the journey of Priam and the encounter of Priam and Achilles. One of the most, I would say, one of the most touching, memorable scenes in all of literature. I think Troy, the movie that I mentioned before, I think it's from the year 2004. So with Brad Pitt as Achilles, and I'm just drawing a blank on who played Priam, but that actor did very well. And in that, I think they did well in that scene. They made sure, they did add a lot and cut a lot, of course, of the epic, but I think they rightly kept that scene and did well with it. In any case, I do encourage you to read that if you haven't. Book 4, we'll talk a bit about it now in terms of what it means in relationship to the whole epic, and how it really ties together the themes of the meaning of human fate in the face of our mortality, and how one of the real central themes of the epic as a whole is this need to face and accept our human fate and lot as mortal, and Achilles and Priam each do so in their own way. So after he's killed Hector, Achilles still can't reconcile himself to Patroclus' death. So he still can't accept mortality. He can't accept that Patroclus is gone. So Patroclus' ghost appears to Achilles, and he asks him to bury the body. Patroclus' ghost can't pass to the underworld if the body is not buried in Greek culture. So Achilles finally complies with the ghost's request and holds an elaborate funeral. And as I mentioned, that takes up book 23 as the funeral and the games. Even after the funeral, though, Achilles continues to fast, and he refrains from bathing, and he continues to drag Hector's corpse around Patroclus's tomb. So the gods have put a charm around Hector's body, so it's not decomposing, it's not being destroyed with all this misuse at Achilles' hands. Finally, the gods intervene. Apollo addresses the other gods and says, it's time to force Achilles to give Hector's bodies back. Enough is enough. Achilles is going beyond the bounds of what is proper. Zeus sends Thetis to speak to Achilles, and Iris to urge Priam to visit Achilles to ransom Hector's body. So Thetis talks to Achilles, try to calm him down, and Iris urges Priam to make this journey. So he has a visit from Iris, a messenger goddess. And Zeus also sends Hermes as a guide for Priam to get to Achilles' tent. So remember, Priam, an old man, has to find his way through the Greek camp. So thousands of Greek soldiers all around. Obviously, Priam is going to be a recognizable figure, and people are going to would definitely not be the safest spot, let's say, for the leader of the Trojans to find themselves in. So he has this guide to say a divine escort that enables him to get to Achilles' tent without being captured or killed. And Hermes is in disguise, but he reveals his identity before leaving. This is something that often happens in the classical epics, is the gods will appear in a form. You know, Achilles is different. He knows his goddess is his mother is a goddess, and that she appears as she is. But for most characters, the gods and goddesses appear in disguise as some sort of human, and maybe as they're departing, they reveal themselves, or the humans kind of catch on. So it's only in their withdrawal that the gods are somehow noticeable. So we have these divine interventions in our human day-to-day affairs, let's say, and maybe only in retrospect we go, wow, that was a real touch of the divine that guided me there. You know, in the time it's happening, our moments that we live, we don't experience it that way. So I think the epics are true to human kind of experience, where we see something in retrospect as, wow, there was a real hand guiding me there. I didn't think it at the time, but I chose to come to Ottawa and get that degree and whatever. And looking back, you know, it turned out to be something that was really fortuitous, or really guided me through some perilous other choices that could have been more disastrous. I said Achilles is different, so, which is true. So he's mother is a goddess. She encounters him directly. Let's keep that in mind when we look at the Aeneid. So Aeneas also has a goddess as a mother, Venus, or the Greek version Aphrodite. And Venus, when she appears to Aeneas, also appears in disguise. So Aeneas has this separation from his family members that is difficult, or if not impossible, for him to broach even his mother, unlike Achilles in the Iliad. So Priam's journey to Achilles' tent, and being guided by Hermes, is in a way a figurative descent into the underworld. In Greek, katabasis is technically this, let's say, descent or downgoing, is a term for this this trope, which is often used in epics. As I mentioned, we don't have a literal katabasis or descent in the underworld in the Iliad, but we'll see it in the Odyssey. We'll see it in the Aeneid. We'll see it in Dante's Divine Comedy. We'll see it in Milton's Paradise Lost. You know, a good portion of it in hell. So we have this in a figurative form in the Iliad. So these descents to the underworld are kind of an archetypal myth theme. So a set of action or sequence within myths and stories that go back as far as stories that we know, like the earliest recorded literature, Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance. And some of the thinking around how this kind of bits of story or narrative arose now is that it's perhaps tied to the agricultural revolution, tied to vegetation cycles and rituals. So with the rise of agriculture, let's say 12,000 years ago in human history, elaborate rituals and cycles around this kind of magical cycle of planting something that seems dead, the seed in the ground, preparing the ground. It goes into the underworld of sorts, and allows and brings forth a new cycle, a new generation of life. Okay, so that kind of entire metaphoric framework of the human community's dependence on that cycle of vegetation for its livelihood is also tied to their notions of, becomes tied to their notions of their own, let's say, psychic journey, and how they can achieve certain virtues and their heroic models in their stories. So in the stories, it involves the descent of the hero to the underworld, so Hades. So the actual descent of the hero physically goes, which Aeneas, for instance, definitely physically goes. That's called a katabasis. Or another way it arises is it's called a nequia, or necromancy, where there's the summoning of the dead. So you dig a pit, you sacrifice, maybe a bull, and pour some wine and the bull's blood and whatever. You follow an elaborate ritual, and the ghosts will come up, drink from the blood and wine. And then again, remember I mentioned when I talked about the Greek notion of the underworld and our existence in the underworld, very shadowy. They don't really have a conscious existence. They're not able to articulate any conscious desires or wishes without these blood sacrifices. And the other points I'll point out is, much like the vegetation cycle, the downgoing, the planting of the seed, the hero going to the underworld, is part of an essential cycle that allows or starts again the cycle of rebirth and a new life. So to here, the hero, so as with the seed and as with the plant, so to the hero in the descent, there's maybe something that they need, either a secret knowledge or heightened awareness of something. In Priam's case, and then also for Achilles, as we'll see, it's the heightened awareness, I think, is this notion of human limits and the acceptance of mortality. So what makes Priam's journey akin to a katabasis? Well, often in terms of how the journey is described as it's being prepared are these references to it being, let me go down to the house of death. So this kind of, it's already metaphorically referred to as this type of journey. The narrator echoes this by saying, the women weep for Priam as if he went to his death. Hermes escorts Priam, and Hermes, in classical myth, one of his duties is to serve as psychopompos, which is this guide of souls. So psyche is soul, and then the pompos is the guide of that soul. And that's one of the functions, is to guide the soul to the underworld. He rides in a wagon, which is generally used as to carry a body to burial. He doesn't ride like in a chariot or some other vehicle, right? He passes over a stream of water as let's say akin to crossing the river Styx in depictions of the underworld. And he passes unseen like a ghost through the Greek camp. So there are a number of parallels with what you would see in a descent into the underworld. So as I said, in the scene, in this scene, we have a powerful exchange of these two enemies, so to speak. So Priam is lost to several sons at the hands of Achilles. He's obviously in tremendous grief. A natural response would be to not just be sick to one's stomach in the presence of the person who killed your sons. And he has to face that, and Achilles, he's seeing someone who's closely related to someone he's devoted so much hatred and revenge on. Maybe his emotion is to want to extend the revenge to other family members. So Priam enters. He begs Achilles in Achilles' father's name, Peleus, says, please grant me this. I'm Hector's father. Think of your father, how your father would want the same if the situation were reversed. He kisses Achilles' hand in a powerful scene. So let's look at that, and we'll look at Achilles' response. So we're to book 24 now, and this is line 570. Remember your own father, great godlike Achilles. As old as I am, past the threshold of deadly old age, no doubt the countrymen round about him plague him now, with no one there to defend him, beat away disaster. No one, but at least he hears you're still alive, and his old heart rejoices, hopes rising day by day to see his beloved son come sailing home from Troy. But I, dear God, my life so cursed by fate, I fathered hero sons in the wide realm of Troy, and now not a single one is left, I tell you. 50 sons I had when the sons of Achilles came, 19 born to me from a single mother's womb, and the rest by other women in the palace. Many, most of them violent Ares, cut the knees from under, but one was left me to guard my walls, my people. The one you killed the other day, defending his fatherland, my Hector. It's all for him I've come to the ships now, to win him back from you. I bring a priceless ransom. Revere the gods, Achilles. Pity me in my own right. Remember your own father. I deserve more pity. I have endured what no one on earth has ever done before. I put to my lips the hands of the man who killed my son. So again, a real touching scene, a real powerful line that I believe in that movie I mentioned, that I believe they capture that basically verbatim. And Achilles' response is notable. Poor man, so they exchange, and Achilles' response, poor man, how much you've borne, pain to break the spirit. What daring brought you down to the ships all alone, to face the glance of the man who killed your sons? So many fine, brave boys. You have a heart of iron. Come, please, sit down on this chair here. Let us put our griefs to rest in our own hearts. Rake them up no more, raw as we are with mourning. What good's to be won from tears that chill the spirit? So the immortals spun our lives that we wretched men, live on to bear such torments. The gods live free of sorrows. There are 2 great jars that stand on the floor of Zeus's halls and holds his gifts. Our miseries one, the other blessings. When Zeus, who loves the lightning, mixes gifts for a man, now he meets with misfortune, now good times in turn. When Zeus dispenses gifts from the jar of sorrows only, he makes a man an outcast. Brutal, ravenous hunger drives him down the face of the shining earth, stalking far and wide, cursed by the gods and men. So Achilles' response is rightly famous. He says a couple of things I think that are notable here. So first of all, let's both of us, let's put a limit to our grief. Let's again accept mortality. And the second point has to do with Zeus's 2 jars when it comes to the gifts from the gods, so to speak. What has been dispensed to us, what's given to us in our human existence. There's miseries and there's blessings, and sometimes, if you're human, it seems that all you get are from the jar of miseries. But the grief is not going to help, and that this is not our lot to judge that. It's not our lot to try to change it. We can't. Our lot is to accept that and to move on. So it's a powerful message. It's a very kind of Greek tragic message, in the sense that we have, say, humans, this kind of existence between for the Greeks, between humans and gods. We aspire to be more than just beasts. We aspire to be godlike, but we have these limits imposed upon us. We aspire to happiness and the eternal, but we are mortal and cannot control if we are just dispensed solely from the jar of miseries rather than blessings. at this point, after taking, so Achilles takes Hector's body to the wagon. Achilles tells Priam that, it's time to eat. So Achilles cites at first Priam's hesitant, said, no, just let me go now, go back now. And Achilles says, let's eat. And he cites the example of Niobe, who managed to eat even after all 12 of her children had been killed. And this is exactly what Thetis and others had been telling Achilles without using that example. But, people had been trying to get Achilles earlier to eat, to move on, to accept. But he had been so driven by the revenge and the grief for Patroclus that he refused to. Now Achilles, in this kind of turning point, is urging Priam to do the same. Let's eat together. So Priam too must come to accept the loss of his son and the limits of human existence. Achilles' speech kind of is this powerful turning point where we see him articulate this acceptance of mortality. And as I said, this is maybe the reason we see Priam depicted as undergoing a journey to the underworld. He has to undertake that journey in order to come to a new awareness and be reborn and have a new look on his life. Priam parallels Achilles in his grief and rage over the loss of his son, and finally he's able to eat and sleep again. So he eats, and I point to these lines, book 24, line 747 to 55, where he says, now I've eaten. It's the first time I've eaten since Hector died. Now I must sleep. I haven't slept either. So find me a spot. So they do. So this theme, as I said, this, I would say, articulates a central theme of the entire epic. And I find these words back in book 6, the words of Glaucus. So Glaucus is facing off Diomedes. During Diomedes' Aristeia, and everyone's being defeated by Diomedes. Diomedes has challenging words for Glaucus, who's this on the Trojan side, the soldier on the Trojan side. And Glaucus has defiant words for him. And as I said, I think they're probably a powerful summation of the theme of the entire epic. So Glaucus says, like the generations of leaves, the lives of mortal men. Now the wind scatters the old leaves across the earth. Now the living timber bursts with the new buds, and spring comes round again. And so with men. As one generation comes to life, another dies away. And Glaucus, of course, is using this very Homeric technique of the simile, and saying, human lives are like the generations of leaves on a tree. They come and go, and those leaves will be cast away and they'll scatter to the wind. And we have, let's say, ways of trying to find a meaning in that. We saw, in the Greek heroic culture, the pursuit of honor and glory is a way of finding a meaning and, let's say, an enduring story around that. To say, okay, well, he lived for a moment, but he did noble things, he did beautiful things, and shined for that moment. So that's one aspect of it, but also that the glory meant that the story would endure over time. So that's one response. There's other responses. Maybe that's small compensation. Remember, that was what we talked about in relation to the book 9, the embassy to Achilles, where he said, well, I don't know, if people talk about me, it's not the same as being alive. And in other respects, in other literature, we'll see maybe the answer is having a legacy of children. That's sometimes often claimed to, or a legacy of one's political achievement. So these are answers humans try to think about to try to come up with to say, okay, well, I've got this fleeting existence like a leaf on a tree that's got one season and it's gone and it blows away, but how can the leaf have a lasting impact on that forest or even that tree? Or what kind of presence does it leave behind? And can it be written in a book? So often we put leaves and press them in a book. So another response in an attempt to make oneself or make one's, let's say, articulation of the truths of human experience endure is writing. So especially in the Renaissance, Renaissance authors such as Spencer, Sir Philip Sidney, Shakespeare, as especially articulated in their sonnets, one of the answers to this kind of problem of mortality becomes, okay, well, virtue, the essential aspect of that human experience can be, let's say, preserved in poetic expression, just as Homer here obviously is in some way preserving the essential aspect of what Achilles was. We don't know what Achilles looked like. We don't know how he was with his friends, but Achilles and the other characters, and Priam as well, Achilles' role as, facing a choice about the meaning of his existence and his fate, and Priam facing this question about how to move on after he's lost everything. So that's preserved. That essential aspect of the human experience is preserved in the words of the poet. So Glaucus' words, again, as I said, really touch this theme of the acceptance of mortality and how do we find a meaning in mortality. And as I mentioned, I would say that's the central takeaway of the epic. Another, let's say, articulation of this, the words of Apollo in book 24. So earlier, before Priam's journey, Apollo says, "No doubt some mortal has suffered a dearer loss than this." So he's referring to Achilles' excessive grief. "A brother born in the same womb, or even a son, he grieves, he weeps, but then his tears are through. The fates have given mortals hearts that can endure." So others move on, and that's kind of the lesson there for Apollo. Apollo is basically saying, humans are given by fate this short portion, but they're also given a heart, let's say, this drive and the will to move on beyond griefs and loss, and there's a need to connect with that aspect as well. So Priam returns to Troy with Hector's body, and the Iliad ends with Hector's funeral. Hermes comes to Priam and urges him not to sleep in the Greeks' camp, and that prompts his return home. I'll point out, I won't turn to the text, but do have a look at the last, let's say, few pages of the work, where interestingly it's the final substantive word, like the final substantive speeches from anyone are from the three women probably most affected and central in the epic. So Andromache, Hecuba, and Helen. So Andromache, wife of Hector; Hecuba, mother of Hector; Helen, concubine of Paris and cause of this Trojan War. They each lament over Hector's body in turn, and each of them plays a prominent role in this tragedy I've mentioned before, the Trojan Women, that by Euripides later on, that I encourage you to read. So it's interestingly that they have the last substantive word. These rather than, let's say, another choice would have been to have some soldier talking about how they're going to emulate Hector and move forward, and I will carry on the fight, or it could have been in the Greek camp. The last words could have been about honoring Achilles' valor, that type of thing. These let's say positive attributes of the martial hero. Here it's the suffering say, these passive victims of the violence, so to speak. And the women, each in their own way, represent a perspective of what war has taken away from the community in a way that, let's say, the soldiers in their kind of quest for valor wouldn't represent. So the conclusion, the meaning of the Iliad. Well, we've talked a bit about it already, but let's try to. We've talked about one aspect in looking at book 24. We've looked at the acceptance of mortality, but let's kind of look back at other, let's say, kind of takeaways from the epic. So I would say one takeaway, and especially for this course in terms of war and literature, I would say that the epic really brings to the fore the ambivalence of war. So war is a bringer of suffering, but also of meaning. So the war, war is described as dreadful, man-killing, as hateful, but it also described as bringing glory to man, and warriors described as eager and yearning for battle. So there's tension in that. I think there's also war as part of this cosmic balance, part of, and we saw that with the shield of Achilles in relation to the city of peace, the city of war. And we see, kind of a balance of life and death, and we see a warrior who is victorious, who vaunts and brags about his victory in downing another victim, but there's also the dying victim or the dead victim, and there's always this balance, and war is part of that. It's part of that balance of peace and war and life and death, and our victories, our losses, our blessings, the jar of blessings, the jar of sorrows. War really articulates that kind of balance sheet of human experience. And here, this really points to this theme that we talked about in book 24, really about this acceptance of the human condition, about coming to grips with mortality, about coming to grips with sorrow and putting a limit on sorrow, putting a limit on rage, putting a limit on revenge, accepting the limited knowledge of our own fate too. So accepting our fate, but accepting the limited knowledge of our own fate. And then the other, let's say, key message I want to point out is what I think is in Homer is this notion of the nobility of all human action in the context of finitude. So human action that's done bravely in the face of that. So some people can go blindly about their lives and fool themselves that this action is, let's say, enduring, and that it has meaning in itself, and what have you. But someone who's guiding the plow, knowing that their existence is finite, that's heroic. That's heroic in Homer, and thus the similes comparing the action of the warrior to the farmer and other acts of the domestic life of the city at peace. But for Homer, I will say, I don't want to overstate that, because for Homer, the last bullet there, definitely for Homer, the human dignity shines most brightly in the acts of war. He doesn't have a poem as Hesiod did called Works and Days, where we just go over the life of the farmer. What he wanted to highlight were these brilliant acts of making that choice within the context of finitude, where it mattered the most, and it was most perspicuous that your life was on the line, and for him that was in war. So that concludes our fifth of 5 lectures on Homer's Iliad. I hope you enjoyed those lectures on the Iliad. I hope you enjoyed reading it. I hope, if you haven't read it, I hope you do, because as I've tried to convey in the lectures, is that because of the enduring value it has in terms of an articulation of the essential questions of the human experience, it has so much it can still speak to us as readers today in the 21st century. And because of the other reason I would mention, just in terms of its impact on later literature and culture. And throughout the lectures, we saw so many paintings. I didn't refer to all of them, but so many paintings, for instance, that we would have on the side of our slides that are directly referring to scenes from the Iliad. So many of our stories, our movies are building on those themes articulated in Homer. So in a way, we don't understand our own culture unless we understand those roots. And Homer is a good place to start in terms of understanding the roots of our contemporary culture. So with that, we'll close this lecture, and we'll close our discussion of the Iliad. In the next lecture, we're going to start with our first exploration into Virgil's Aeneid. Thank you.